Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining the Nonprofit Learning Lab for today's workshop. If you have any questions along the way for our presenters, you can type them into the question box in your go-to control panel, likely on the right-hand side of your screen. If you have any tech questions, you can also type them there. If you're interested in receiving the recordings and materials from today's free webinar, you can visit our free webinars page on the Nonprofit Learning Lab website, or you can send us an email at program@nonprofitlearninglab. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Amy.
Thanks so much. Hey, everybody, and welcome. I'm excited to be giving this presentation today and would love to know who all is in the room. So if you are comfortable, please feel free to put your name, your organization, and where you're tuning in from in the chat. And we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Amy Krigsman. I am the owner and principal consultant of ARC Nonprofit Consulting. I specifically work with small to mid-sized nonprofit organizations in social justice spaces. And what that means is I do a lot of different things, from strategic planning to grant research and writing to program development and evaluation. I received my bachelor's of business administration from Texas Women's University, a graduate certificate in event management from the University of Central Florida, and I'm currently pursuing dual masters in nonprofit management and public administration, also at the University of Central Florida. I'm also a proud member of the Association of Consultants to Nonprofits, and we are thrilled to partner with the Nonprofit Learning Lab on presentations like this one. Nonprofit organizations are under ever-increasing pressure to demonstrate the impact of their programs in new and exciting ways to capture the attention of funders and supporters in order to sustain their work. Storytelling is one mechanism for doing just that. However, it's no longer enough to tell a funder how many people your organization served. More and more, funders are concerned with the upstream impacts of the number of people your organization served. What societal change occurred as a result of your efforts? What shifted in your clients' lives as a result of the service they received from you? You need to take your stakeholders on that journey that explains the value of the work that you do, and you need to back it up with data. The goals of this workshop are for participants to come away with an understanding of the ties between evaluation and story, the importance of storytelling, for you to know the basics of when and what types of evaluation to use to convey your organization's story, and to learn about different methods of storytelling and when to use them. So let's dive in. So what even is storytelling? According to the National Storytelling Network, storytelling is the interactive art of using words and actions to reveal the elements and images of a story while encouraging the listener's imagination. Now, those are pretty words, but what do they actually mean? Let's break that down. So storytelling requires a two-way interaction between the storyteller, you, and one or more listeners, your donors, supporters, volunteers, etc. The interactive nature of storytelling partially accounts for its immediacy and impact. And at its best, storytelling can directly and tightly connect the teller and the audience, which is exactly what you want. However, achieving something interactive in a stagnant medium, like an annual report, can be difficult, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Storytelling also uses language, which is pretty straightforward, right? You need to be able to communicate ideas and actions. While you may have some occasions to get up and tell your organization story to a room full of people, more often than not, you'll be communicating via written word with things like appeals and annual reports, your website, and so on. So how do you achieve vocalization, physical movement, and gesture with a written piece? If anybody here has ever wrote a work of fiction, authors do it all the time. Your storytelling needs to be so good that the reader feels like they're in the room with you. This next one probably seems obvious. Storytelling involves the presentation of a story or a narrative. It has a character or characters, a plot, a point of view, a theme, a setting, and a dialogue. The completed story happens in the mind of the listener. The listener becomes, therefore, a co-creator of the story as they experience it. Now, I want to dig into the last point a little bit more. Our brains become more active when we tell and hear stories. When we are being told a story, not only are the language processing parts of our brain being activated, but any other area in our brain that we would use when experiencing the events of the story are too. For example, if someone tells us about how delicious certain foods were, our sensory cortex lights up. Not only that, but the brains of the person telling a story and listening to a story can synchronize, meaning the same centers in the brain that are active in the storyteller are also active in the listener. Our brains are also wired to automatically think in narratives. We do it all day long, whether we're thinking about going to the grocery store or on our next vacation. We also relate stories we hear to our own experiences to find better ways of connecting to the emotions of the story. Storytelling is one of the most powerful techniques we have as humans to communicate and motivate, and what makes stories even more compelling is detail. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about data. Data is the information such as facts and numbers used to analyze something or make decisions. You get it by conducting research and evaluation. Now, this is the part where people's eyes start to glaze over a little bit and they tune out because evaluation makes them nervous. Stay with me. We're going to go through a quick little crash course in evaluation. There are 5 main types of evaluation. Formative evaluation, as you may deduce, takes place during the development stage of a program to assess its viability early on, and so adjustments can be made for improvement. Summative evaluation, on the other hand, is conducted at the conclusion of a program and provides information on its effectiveness. Process evaluation focuses on the implementation of the program to determine if it was implemented as intended or if there were breakdowns in the process. Outcome evaluation measures the changes in knowledge, attitude, and behaviors that resulted from the program delivery, and they're related to more short and midterm goals. Impact evaluation focuses on long-term sustained changes in the condition you're trying to affect. Now, you can use either quantitative or qualitative methods when approaching any of the 5 types of evaluation. Quantitative methods yield numerical data and have a much more formal structure. And some examples include surveys and assessments documenting the frequency of a phenomenon's occurrence and so on. Qualitative methods provide a much deeper dive into a specific area of interest and focus more on why and how programs are successful. Examples of qualitative methods include interviews or focus groups. Now, I'm a data nerd, so I could spend all day talking about evaluation, and this is barely scraping the surface, but it should at least help give you some foundational concepts to explore. Once you've collected your data, you need to do something with it, and you need to use it to tell a compelling story. There are 3 keys to telling good stories. The simple story is more successful than the complicated one. When we think of stories, it's often easy to convince ourselves that they have to be complex and detailed to be interesting. The truth, however, is that the simpler a story is, the more likely it is to stick with the recipient. The brain also learns to ignore overused words and phrases. This means that the frontal cortex, the area of your brain responsible for experiencing emotions, can't be activated with those phrases, which, as we learned earlier, is a major goal of storytelling. And finally, the devil is in the details. You want to be specific, and this is where your data comes in. So let's look at an example. Take a minute to read these 2 stories. Which one do you connect with? Which organization are you more likely to support, and why is that? The first story provides very basic information. It's barely an elevator pitch. The second story provides much more data. Think about which of the data points stick out to you in these 2 stories. The last thing I want to touch on is where to tell your story, and this is going to depend on which segment of your audience you're trying to reach. To reach the general public, you'll share on social media or your website. To reach donors and funders, your primary tools will be your annual report and grant applications you submit. You can also create other types of publications like white papers and press releases. Sharing your story is the most important step. It's how you raise awareness for your cause and your organization, and it's how you attract new supporters and donors. My challenge to you today is to see how many places and in how many different ways you can share your story. Now, that's all I've got for you today. I wanted to make sure we had plenty of time for questions, and so we'll open it up for that.
Thanks, Amy. I'm not seeing any questions come in yet, but we can give it just a couple more minutes or so just to see, gives people some time to type any out. Okay, we have one. How do you feel about equating volunteer hours with money?
I think it's important in terms of your budget when you're putting that together for funders. I wouldn't necessarily use that when conveying with the general public, because it's not really something that is going to resonate with them as much as it will for funders.
Awesome. Okay. If you aren't on the front lines, how do you get the stories?
So you have to work with the people on the front lines. Um, this is one example of how an entire organization needs to work together. Um, Things like development and evaluation um, are everyone's job, even if it's not in their job description. So you have to have really good working relationships with your development department, with your evaluation department, so that you can get those stories and use them um, to share that with funders and so on.
Thanks. Okay, we have another. What medium do you find storytelling to be the most effective?
Yeah, so it really depends on your organization and where you think most of your supporters are going to be. Um, I'm a fan of Instagram right now, but I'm also a fan of a traditional annual report. There are several different mediums for that. You can just put it together in like Adobe if you have that capability. You can put it together in Canva, and Canva has a free option for nonprofits. And then you can get as sophisticated as a digital annual report through something like Yearly.
Awesome. Which data visualization tool would you recommend?
If you, whatever one you have experience in, honestly, you can use Excel for data viz. You can get as complicated as using something like Power BI or Tableau. My personal experience is with Power BI, and I think that it's a great tool. Um, if you have the ability, work with a consultant that specializes in data visualization and use their recommendation and whatever tools that they use.
Awesome. Let's see. Someone asked for examples. I'm not quite sure exactly what that's referring to. Or can you speak to the balance between keeping your story simple but also including details?
Yeah, so if you look at the example that I gave earlier, that's kind of where the balance lays, right? You want your story to be succinct because you don't want to lose the reader, but you also want to provide enough detail that they are understanding of your organization and what you do. Um, it comes with practice, and I think a really good way to practice that is actually by writing grant applications because most of them have word counts and character counts. So really learning how to convey um, your story in a short amount of words in a short space. It's a skill that, like anything else, requires work and practice.
Awesome. As far as storytelling, how much do you rely on graphics?
That would depend on the medium that you're using. Um, if you're if you're going with an annual report, you have a little bit more space to utilize graphics. Likewise, if you're using Instagram, it's a very visual based platform. But if you're applying for a grant, there's not likely any place to use visuals, so you're going to have to um, really learn how to tell your story without relying on graphics. Graphics should be a supporting element, not the whole story.
Cool. Uh, let's see. Can you show an example of a good data-driven story? I don't know if you have one on hand or know one off the
I
top of your
don't
head.
have one on hand.
That's okay. Let's see. Got a few more. You mentioned white papers. How do you merge data and storytelling to make those compelling so they actually get read?
Um, that's a good question. Um, can you repeat the question for me?
Yes. You mentioned white papers. How do you merge data and storytelling to make those stories compelling so they actually get read and the data make it all compelling?
Yeah. So your introduction is really going to be where you start to tell your story. And I think that's true of any medium, not just a white paper. And then you want to weave it through. So your data is there to support the story, more than the story is to support the data. Hope that answers your question.
Let's see. Do you have advice for how to integrate qualitative performance indicators in process evaluations? And there's kind of a second part. What kinds of performance indicators have been most useful in your work to capture the stories of program beneficiaries?
Oof, that's a loaded question. Okay. um, so read the first part to me again.
Yeah, do you have any advice for how to integrate qualitative performance indicators in process evaluations?
Qualitative into process evaluation. Um, yeah, so in that instance, what you could do is, and this is me just spitballing off the top of my head, you could do surveys or interviews with the program staff, and gear those questions specifically towards um, the process of the program and how it was implemented. Um, you can also do what I think is helpful. It's called a post-mortem. And that's where after the program is complete, you go back and assess what worked and what didn't. And, were there failures to the project? Why did those occur? And that really helps you to look at the process of how the program was implemented and how it was laid out versus what were the actual outcomes. Um, and indicators that I've used. I think whether or not your program was implemented on the time frame that it was intended to, um, if you achieved the outcomes that you intended to. Um, what else? How the the ease of implementation, I think, is also something to look at.
Yeah, all right. Okay, we have someone who says, if we are a new nonprofit who hasn't been able to make our own stories, how can we create stories? I'm thinking existing statistics about the populations we serve, maybe stories that could be if we have the support. I'm starting a fundraiser for our first year/startup and trying to think of how I can use stories.
Yeah, I think what you had said is actually really a great idea, utilizing statistics and data that is already out there for the populations that you serve. You don't want to, make something up for constituents that you don't have, of course, but um, creating a um, creating a background understanding of the issues, and what your organization is doing to resolve those issues is definitely a good step.
All right. You mentioned annual reports. Are there some specifics you recommend to really bring this stagnant medium to life?
Yeah, my favorite right now is a platform called Yearly. It actually is a digital annual report platform where you can insert things like audio and video, which is really cool. You can make the report itself very interactive. Um, and so that to me is a really great option. If you don't want to go with a whole full-blown annual report like platform like that, even just creating like a 3 to 5 minute video of your organization's impact for the year is a great way to tell your story in a way that is very interactive and draws people in.
Awesome. Do you know, someone asked if Yearly offers discounts to nonprofits?
They actually specifically look to work with nonprofits, so they don't have separate rates.
Okay, cool. Let's see. How do you recommend sharing data that might not be contextually familiar for all readers, like sharing impact on income in a different county where currency and cost of living differ from what readers are familiar with?
Tell people that the way to create context is to add that and to weave that into your story.
Cool. Um, let's see. Do you have any tips for telling stories that are appealing to groups that hold values that may be divergent? Examples are uh, college students, private timberland owners. I'm not.
I'm not sure what timberland owners are. Um, so speaking to diverse audiences, you have to really pinpoint what those audiences care about and appeal to that. For instance, college students are going to have a very different motivation than funders with a lot of money. So when you figure out what those different demographics are trying to get out of the story, it'll help you to figure out how to craft it around what it is they care about.
Awesome. I think I got through all of the questions. If I missed anybody's question, we have a lot. You can definitely reach out to Amy from her website, which she has on her slide up.
Yes, and the QR code on this slide is my contact information, so feel free to scan that and get in touch with me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Amy. This workshop has come to a close. If anybody is interested in receiving the recordings and materials for today's free webinar, you can visit our free webinars page on the Nonprofit Learning Lab website. That should be uploaded sometime this afternoon, should be available by tomorrow. Or you can send us an email at program@nonprofitlearninglab.org. Thank you all so much for participating. And again, thank you, Amy.
Thanks so much.